Welcome, Len Harris. Thanks for coming on the show, Len. Such short notice.
Thank you very much for the privilege, Michael.
Let's just jump into it. Your story was amazing. Why are you on the road? What are you attempting to do, and why are you attempting to do it?
Well, Michael, this goes back to 2019 with a friend of mine who lived in a North Queensland town, Charters Towers. He had a 1 acre block of land within the city of Charters Towers. He wanted to divide that block into two and then put some buildings on the second block. So he handed in a beautiful parchment title that was issued in 1920, had all of the current details on it right up until this person purchased the block. The deal was completed, he paid the fees, the land was surveyed, and then came to the point where he thought, well, I'll go in and collect my two titles. So he went into what was the lands department in Charters Towers, only to be told, oh, well, look, we're sorry, there are no titles. And he said, well, what do you mean there aren't any titles? I gave you the original parchment title. I want that back. They said, no, you can't have it back. So he rang me quite distressed, and it took me some time to actually even be able to find out what was going on. Initially, I thought this was a Queensland government issue. So in my naivety, I actually took the Queensland government to the Supreme Court, challenging where did they derive the power to actually cancel everybody's titles in Queensland, the documents themselves. And I'd like to just emphasise two things to all of your listeners. First of all, I do not provide legal advice, and all of the information that I'm sharing with you tonight is all in the open area. I only use information from either Acts of Parliament or documents that have been issued by non-government entities, NGOs. So that's what actually started me on this process. The more I dug into the situation, not only had Queensland cancelled all documents, all title documents in 2019, the whole process actually started with Barry O'Farrell as the Premier of New South Wales in 2012, copied a Canadian act that allowed the government to transfer from paper act, providing paper to either purchase or sell a property. It allowed them, the government, then to transfer that into electronic lodgement. Now, I'll just say, yes, I do have some concern with electronic lodgement, but the real problem lies in that when Barry O'Farrell took that New South Wales Act to an entity called COAG, that's C-O-A-G. So COAG is the coalition of Australian governments. There is no constitutional power or standing for COAG. There is no state legislation to underpin COAG. It's something that the premiers of all of the states and the heads of the two territories, Northern Territory and the ACT, in conjunction with the federal government, created this entity. It's what they then did. All of the states by 2013 had agreed to adopt the New South Wales Act.
Paper title, my solicitor had it. He was instructed to place a stamp on that says destroyed, not to be used for legal purposes. Perils of living in a van.
I hope that's better. I just swapped.
So Mark McDonald here, he's got his original paper title, but my solicitor had it. He's instructed to place a stamp on it that says destroyed, not for legal purposes.
Correct.
So your paper
actually
title now, just to clarify, your paper title now, like my parents worked 30 years to pay off their mortgage, got their title, 30 years. That title is now worthless. It's just nothing. The paper title.
As far as the government is concerned, yes. However, that title is your personal property, and the government has no power or no jurisdiction over the titles. In actuality, part of the process that I'm embarking on is to clarify that the state governments have no contract with the Crown to actually even record or disperse land of the Crown. The only entities in Australia who are authorised by the Crown are the governors, when the governor is actually exercising the power that they have received directly from the Crown. And the Crown I'm talking about is the Crown of the United Kingdom. That Crown is made up of the Crown of England, the Crown of Northern Ireland, and the Crown of Scotland. So they have to be consulted when any changes are to be made in relation to dispensing or transferring land of the Crown. When a person purchases a piece of property within the Commonwealth, irrespective of whether it is a piece of land that is still Crown land and they're purchasing it, their contract is directly with the Crown through the governor, not the state parliament. Now, this is going to be one unholy fight when I actually get to the House of Commons, which I will be. I will be taking the remedy to all of these problems by petition to the House of Commons. But I digress there. Coming back to your actual contract, all the governors of each of the state and the CEO of the Northern Territory and the ACT, they are empowered to actually provide folios for which the lot numbers and the person who owns that lot number to be entered into that folio. The governors are also empowered to employ personnel to make those entries. This is all set out in Queen Victoria's instructions that actually accompany every governor in every state.
So just to have a discussion now, because let's have a discussion, not a speech, because his speech is going up. So we've got questions here. Petite wants to know, how do you get our true titles, Len?
Well, at the present moment, according to legislation that the states have passed, which is beyond their power to actually pass it, therefore that legislation is technically what is called ultra vires. of no effect.
So it's
The governments themselves claim that they have made all of everybody's title documents of no legal standing. They even have the audacity to tell us that all we can do with them is have them framed and hang them up on the wall as an artefact. Well, what I'm saying to the people is treat those documents as if they are still a lawful document, because they are. The governments, in cancelling them, right, do not have the power to do that.
So
treat them as everybody has done.
If they haven't got the power to do it, how have they done it? How has our entire legal system allowed it to happen if they never had the power? QCs, everything. Oops, he's gone. That's a good question, Nanny Vic. I'll put that up as soon as he gets back. Hey, Len, let's try again.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Just one moment.
That's all right. What I'm really interested in is, how has the government managed to do this? How has it managed to, if you're correct, do all of this and nothing's been raised? The mainstream media are silent, everything's silent. And what you were saying in the meeting, which I thought was really interesting or scary, was that basically you could lose your title and not even know it. They're like using it for, putting it out there in the marketplace, basically. If I'm paraphrasing. Can we talk about that? How did the government manage to get away with this?
Well, in actuality, as I explained at the meeting over the weekend, the premiers themselves, without consulting their parliaments, they may have discussed it with their cabinet, but they certainly did not mention this in any parliament around Australia. This is back in 2013, when they all agreed to adopt and take on the New South Wales Act. What they have done is stepped totally out of the parliamentary process and created a series of corporations to effectively carry out the work that the Titles Office has done ever since the individual states were created.
Sorry to interrupt. With those premiers, they weren't just all Liberal or Labor. They were a mix, weren't they? Liberal and Labor. So they were working together.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Yes. Barry O'Farrell was Liberal. The Victoria was Labor. Western Australia was a Liberal. And I'll sit to be corrected. I'm pretty sure that South Australia at the time was Liberal. So you're correct. There is a mismatch. Northern Territory, it was a Liberal Country Party coalition, and obviously Queensland was Labor. And in the federal...
Can I ask again? Yes. What was their motivation? What did they get out of it by going out of their things? Basically, it seems to be corruption on a ridiculous level. What was in it for them? Why would they do it?
Well, that's very, very difficult to understand. What I can explain to you, that it has actually relieved all of the states the responsibility of A, guaranteeing title, wow. B, recording mortgages. No state now in Australia records the mortgages. The other entity, and I make this statement knowing the risk in saying it, but it is true, the banks were major backers in this actually occurring.
Is that a fact?
The reason for that, if the state governments were no longer recording the mortgage transactions, that left the banks a little bit less liable for on-selling the mortgages. What the banks do, and I particularly know, and I'm not picking on these two by themselves, but Westpac, Bendigo Bank, which now has been acquired by Westpac, they have a branch in New York through which trusts have been actually created. The mortgages are then transferred into bonds and sold on the open market through those trusts. Now, there is a legal question as to whether the banks have actually severed the contract, because all of this has been done without the consent of one of the parties in the contract. For a contract or a mortgage to be fully functional, it has to be equitable to both parties. So the person gets ownership of the property, use of the property. The bank actually receives interest on the loan that they have created with the owner of the property. However, when one party then decides to on-sell that debt, that severs that mortgage. So this is one of the major reasons why the banks have requested of the government to cancel all of the title documents, and also for the governments to no longer register the mortgages.
There's a thing here. Somebody is saying they worked for Queensland government at the time this happened. They were told it was outsourcing the management of the title register. But what you're saying sounds very much like what happened in the world financial credit crisis, where they put all the mortgages together in these truncheons,
Yes.
whatever, and they sell them
Yes, correct.
and that's what
Yes.
basically brought down the entire financial system. And you're sort of implying that they might be doing that.
I'm not implying. Sorry for butting in, Michael. I'm not implying. I'm telling the people out there.
So
I have a document.
It's being sold on the open market, put up in this truncheon.
I can't say all of them. All of them have, Michael.
Yeah.
But what I do know, that I have in my possession a letter that a couple from Queensland requested of their banks whether the mortgage had been on-sold. They received, not from their local bank in their town, they received correspondence from Westpac Bank in New York. And in that letter, it actually names the trusts that were created and used to package the mortgages up as bonds and actually sold on the international market. They also had the audacity in the last paragraph to say to this couple, there is no point in you going into your local Westpac or Bendigo Bank and ask them about this process. And the exact words were, they have not been written into the process and are unable to assist you.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. So this
Now,
lady here, Ali, is saying, where can you find out if your mortgage, if your own mortgage has been unsold? Literally, you can't. You don't know.
I believe there is a process, and it's a very, very old process. That is I have access two documents. It's called a show cause.
Yeah.
So you actually issue a show cause on the person in the bank who actually arranged the mortgage in the first place and paid on behalf of the bank. What the show cause does is notifies that person unless they provide the information relating to the mortgage itself. They are actually offending the 1914 Crimes Act, and Section 47 of that is a charge for perverting the cause of justice. A few bank people, and it's not the bank that's actually getting that show cause, it is the guy who pulls the jocks on in the morning or the woman who pulls the G-string on and goes to work. They wear the responsibility.
And I bet they have no idea about that.
No, of course they don't.
Wow. Wow. So, okay.
So
what chance
Go
do
on.
people have of losing their house through this? I mean, if their mortgage is somewhere, is that going to be bothered? At some point, could a foreign entity just sort of cancel the mortgage? And what are the safeguards behind this?
banks do, in their normal process of loaning money, have people sign documents creating the mortgage.
Mhm.
Invariably, they will have a clause in there that states that the bank has the power to appoint a receiver.
Yeah.
They do not.
Wow.
The reason they don't is that it is only a judge of the federal court or higher who actually has the authority to appoint a receiver over a person's belongings. And there is a famous quote by one of the high courts, Kirby, who says that an entity, so in this case it's the bank, an entity cannot write themselves into constitutionality by verbatim. In other words, he's saying it doesn't matter what they write in a contract or what they verbally tell a person. They cannot create a point where that contract is actually, well, the part of the contract, the part where the bank claims to have the right to appoint a receiver, they can't write themselves into that point.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Commonwealth Banking Act says that only a judge of the federal court or higher can issue what is called a sequestrian order. And that is, that officially places a receiver in charge of that person's assets.
Okay.
What has been happening for years and years, that not only with housing loans, but other matters, the magistrate in a magistrate's court, right, have required the registrar to sign a sequestrian order. And the High Court, to my knowledge, has on 4 occasions very, very clearly stated that the registrar of a magistrate's court is a stranger to the court. That's the legal way of saying the registrar is in charge of the office outside of the court and cannot step into the court and sign a document.
From Tash.
Yep.
All the laws seem to mean nothing. We seem to be in a lawless time where we're hearing that this is how it's supposed to work, and yet for decades the government has just ignored it and done it its own way. And
That's absolutely correct.
I don't understand. Like from Gough Whitlam, apparently it all stemmed from Gough Whitlam, I think, and Hawke, not Hawke.
No, you're correct. Yeah,
And
Whitlam in 1973 actually purports, and I use that word meaning without power, removed the word Commonwealth from all legislation.
yeah,
So the Privy Council in England, in relation to part of what we're discussing with titles, has ruled that there has not been a lawful government in the Commonwealth of Australia since 1973. So Gough Whitlam actually offended Section 2 of the English Empowering Act that is inserted in our Constitution, in that it starts from Section 1 through to 9, and that is an actual English Act. It's called Victoria Act 63 and 64. The House of Commons actually created legislation to empower Queen Victoria to actually proclaim the Commonwealth of Australia into existence. Then Hawke in 1986 then brought in the Australia Act. The way that was actually achieved was by the premiers of the states writing to the House of Commons and requesting that they bring on a bill to create the Australian government. Well, the actual House of Commons erred at law, because the only authority that could actually do that would be a bill passed in every parliament and every territory in Australia, and being in the affirmative, yes, we wish to remove Australia out of the Commonwealth regime. The other thing that they were required to actually do under Section 128 of our Constitution was to actually have a referendum to empower the states to do that, which they neither had the referendum prior to the premiers themselves asking, not the parliaments. So they have problems with that. And there is no authority whatsoever to create the false Queen of Australia, because in the Empowering British Act from the House of Commons, Section 2 states very, very clearly that the Commonwealth of Australia is intrinsically tied to the United Kingdom through the Crown, and in this case it was Queen Victoria, and also tied to her heirs and successors. So there can't be a Queen of Australia. It has to be the Queen of, or the King, as we have now, King Charles, as the head of the Commonwealth.
I have heard all this. I've interviewed Neil Pitchener, I think, and I've interviewed Rod a few times, and I've heard this around common law. It's there's some people say it's not. But what I don't understand is, how has our entire legal system allowed this to happen? Judges, High Court judges,
correct.
QCs. How is that? How are the journalists? How has this managed to have happened, that these guys have just got together, basically done something that they really needed a referendum for, not bothered with the referendum? So why do they bother with referendums now? Why did they do that illegally, and now they go back to pretending to do things legally, if initially everything we know is just based on a lie, which seems to be where we are. That's what, getting back to the
That,
titles.
that's yeah.
We
Well,
seem to be going further and deeper into a lie. So how has that happened?
well, it's happened, unfortunately, Michael, because you and I were not aware of it. So how do you oppose something that you're
Yeah.
not aware of?
Yeah, but
It
there
was
must have
so.
been some people aware. Must have been some group. I find it
Oh, yes,
interesting that there hasn't been a deep whistleblower or someone, or just, even the meeting where they brought it together and they said, well, it's actually treason what we're committing here. And suddenly here we are, and we're all going to commit treason. I find that so. But well, in this current environment, I don't find it odd at all. But
yeah,
we're in such a strange place, and I've seen how crap and useless the courts have been. With many friends of mine that have been to court, you know what I mean?
yes,
We seem to be in a lawless land.
yes, and part of the reason for the no reaction whatsoever. Yes, none of us were aware of what was occurring, but also it's difficult for people to actually grasp the concept that the very people that we have elected as our representatives in the government could actually turn around and totally shaft us unbelievably, beyond, wildly beyond the average person's capability to even imagine that they would do that.
Yeah.
And I'm not belittling people. It is. I have been on the road virtually perpetually since 2019.
Oh, and I
I've
can
actually,
about this. He lives in a van.
yeah,
Van is covered. It's like a smaller version of mine. I've got a bus which is behind me, but Len's got a van. It's covered in all of this stuff, constitutional title rights, everything like this. You truly are doing the hard yards, and
yes, mm,
and here we are, and it's staggering because it's like, who are we as a race? What are we? Are we just these idiots that the corporations are just ripping the carpet out from under us? And it's such a strange thing,
yes, such a strange situation.
Yeah,
Michael,
really.
I think what would help your listeners and that who are following the program, I think if I walked people very carefully through how this has actually been perpetrated, so that they understand how far outside the actual government process these premiers have stepped.
That would be good.
They individually made the conscious decision not only to cancel the actual title deeds, the documents themselves of you and I and every other person who owns a parcel of land in Australia, they also cancelled their own. How do you, in your own mind, even begin to understand? And these people have houses that are valued in the millions of dollars. Is there some protection for them that we're not available to? It's a reasonable question to raise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
Absolutely.
you think, okay, we're in Victoria. I'm not aware of how many parliamentarians are in the Victorian government, like in the lower house and also in the Senate. These people have cancelled their own title documents. Why?
I don't know.
So I can't give you a logical answer for that.
Mm.
But what I do know that is lurking around the corner, and not so much in Victoria. I haven't heard the terminology used in Victoria, but in New South Wales, the new terminology there is managed retreat. So what do they mean by managed retreat? Well, it's very simple. It ties into the UN's 15-minute cities. And if you are outside of those areas, your ability to live there is going to become harder and harder, more expensive, less services.
That's why.
Until
Is that why they're closing the banks in these country towns? Because I go to these country towns and the banks are closing. That's why they're doing it.
Yes, absolutely. And the next thing you'll find is that hospitals will be closed, ambulances will be withdrawn, schools will be closed.
So
That is
no point, no
Yep.
choice.
that is managed retreat. They're also talking about insurance companies refusing to insure property outside of the 15 minutes. They're also talking about, from now on, a temperature above 30 degrees C is to be determined to be a heat risk.
Yeah, I heard you say that. That's incredible. You know what I mean? It's amazing.
Yeah. So anyhow, coming back to how was this perpetrated? Well, part of it was the actual time frame that it took for every state government to cancel title documents. Victoria was the first cab off the rank. Victoria cancelled all Victorians' title documents in 2016. South Australia cancelled theirs in 2017. Queensland cancelled ours in 2019.
Wow.
New South Wales cancelled theirs in 1921.
Yeah.
And Western Australia waited until 1923. Had they have cancelled every title document in the whole of Australia in 2013,
There would have been outcry.
yes, absolutely. So they have very skillfully stretched it over that period. So not to ensure, but to have a greater chance of getting away with it. So what did they do? In 2013, when all of the premiers, and I keep on hammering, it was the premiers, the very premiers that every state elected, who made the decision to enter into electronic lodgement, knowing full well part of that process was to cancel the title documents. Once they had all decided to do that, then COAG, which is the coalition of Australian governments, again, there is no constitutional power or jurisdiction for them to actually do what they were doing. There was no state legislation at that point in time for them to make the decisions that they did. The first thing they did was created an entity of ARNEC. Now, that's an acronym for the Australian Registrar's National Electronic Conveyancing Council. So that is what I call an IT. It's not a law. It's not a government department. It is the premiers deciding that they're stepping outside the parliament and creating these entities. Once they had established, and as it says, right, Australian Registrar's National Council Conveyancing, the registrars previously were always a public servant in the titles office. They are not now. They are now employees of private corporations. The second thing they did was then established the electronic lodgement network. So in other words, there is an electronic network now that embraces the whole of Australia. So where did the funds come from that? Well, the Commonwealth Bank stumped up 200 million.
How nice of them.
Did they ask their shareholders? I doubt it. Morgan and Stanley, through one of their superannuation funds, they stumped up 200,000, and a third entity did the same.
1,000 or million?
So millions.
Yeah, 200.
200, yeah.
Because
200 million each.
corporations do not spend that sort of money unless they're going to make a load of money back.
Correct.
That's
Yes.
corporations. I mean, the world is the way it is, thanks to, the corporations have been very good for us, but at the same time, they get out of control. And at the moment, they are out of control.
Out of control.
They're just enslaving us.
Correct.
And they probably think they're doing it for our betterment to protect the world and climate change. Let's admit, it's bullshit. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
And they're just enslaving us. And the real problem is us. And I don't mean you and me, but the real problem is the ordinary Joe Blow public. And I was one of them. I never knew this was happening. I thought Whitlam was a good guy. And here we are, watching it, realizing we've just been shafted and shafted again and shafted again and treated like the idiots we are because we've been ignorant.
Yeah. Well, yes and no. There have been some very, very skillful psychological programs that are very adept in leaking out small portions of information, but doing it in such a way that, yes, there is anger and there is resentment. But if it's out there long enough, right, eventually people will become accustomed to something that before was absolutely abhorrent to them. One of the best examples of that I can give you is when Bob Hawke actually provided the 100th lecture at the Fabian Society in Melbourne. He used an analogy of the inevitability of gradualism, and how he actually explained that was you go down to the beach and you stand at the beach and you can stand there for an hour and watch the waves come in and the waves go out. You can be there for an hour and you would not be able to determine whether the tide is coming in or going out. So if the changes are so subtle, people accept that yes, there are tides. The tide comes in, the tide goes out. That's the process. That is the inevitability of gradualism.
Wow. I just got a comment here from Glenn Pearson. This is a great comment, Glenn. First time commenter. I haven't seen him before. In the top boardrooms, in the back of the mind, is the idea that capital needs certainty. So enslavement makes sense in a perverse way. This is right. I mean, corporations are psychopathic. The actual corporation itself is psychopathic. So why wouldn't it do that? Thanks for the comment.
Yes.
There's, that's
so,
really...
okay. Yeah. So again, back on track. They created ARNEC, which put the registrars out of the statutory position into employment by a corporation. Mm-hmm. Then the next thing, they needed a system that would work Australia-wide. So those three entities put up 600 million, right? The next thing that they did, they then created the electronic national law, the electronic conveyancing national law. That's the next process that they created. So that's the first time anything appeared in anyone's parliament, the adoption of that law that was created by ARNEC. Didn't come out of a parliament, didn't come out of a senate.
Hasn't had the king's assent, the royal
No,
assent.
of course it hasn't. So then the final section of that, once they had the national electronic national law, then the registrars in each of the states were then empowered to grant licenses for corporations to actually do the transactions in relation to property sales.
Can run on for a long time, run on for a long time, run on for a long time. Sooner or later gotta cut you down, sooner or later gotta cut you down. Go tell that long-tongued liar, go and tell that midnight rider, tell the rambler, the gambler, the backbiter, tell him that God's gonna cut him down, tell him that God's gonna cut him down.